Welcome to the video I've entitled A Much Too Quick Overview of Critical Race Theory, structured around the history, motivations, criticisms, misconceptions, and key ideas of critical race theory, including intersectionality, structural racism, the construction of whiteness, counter-storytelling, and social justice. This video was written and produced and is presented by me, Andrew Chapman. Critical race theory, or CRT, is an interdisciplinary approach to understanding how race and racism intersect with other forms of oppression and social hierarchy. The theory emerged in the United States in the late 1970s and 1980s among legal scholars and activists who were concerned with addressing the persistence of racial inequality despite legal and social progress in the civil rights era. CRT has since expanded beyond legal scholarship to influence fields such as education, sociology, political science, and philosophy. CRT emerged in the aftermath of the civil rights era, which saw significant legal and social progress in terms of desegregation, voting rights, and anti-discrimination policies. However, many legal scholars and activists were concerned that these gains had not translated into meaningful change for communities of color. They observed that, despite legal protections, racial disparities persisted in areas such as housing, education, employment, and the criminal justice system. In response to these concerns, legal scholars began to develop an alternative framework for understanding the persistence of racial inequality. Rather than viewing racism as a matter of individual bias or intentional discrimination, they argued that racism is embedded in social structures and operates through unconscious biases, implicit assumptions, and institutional practices. This approach was influenced by other critical theories such as critical legal studies, feminist theory, and Marxist theory, which all sought to uncover the hidden power structures and ideological assumptions that shape social reality. The early pioneers of CRT include lawyer, professor, and scholar Derrick Bell, lawyer and scholar Kimberlé Crenshaw, legal scholar and professor Richard Delgado, lawyer and professor Mari Matsuda, and lawyer and professor Patricia Williams. These scholars developed a set of core ideas and concepts that continue to shape the field today. CRT emphasizes the intersectional nature of oppression, meaning that race intersects with other forms of identity and social hierarchy, such as gender, class, sexuality, and disability. Kimberlé Crenshaw introduced the concept of intersectionality to CRT in the late 1980s, arguing that legal frameworks that only address one form of discrimination, such as race or gender, fail to account for the complex ways in which different forms of oppression intersect and reinforce each other. CRT rejects the idea that racism is a matter of individual prejudice or bias. Instead, it argues that racism is embedded in social structures and institutions such as education, housing, and the criminal justice system. Structural racism refers to the ways in which these systems operate to maintain racial inequality, even in the absence of intentional discrimination. CRT argues that white privilege and dominance are central to understanding the persistence of racial inequality. Whiteness refers to the invisible set of norms, values, and cultural assumptions that shape social reality and benefit those who are identified as white. CRT scholars argue that white supremacy is not just a matter of individual attitudes, but is embedded in the structures and practices of society. A cautionary note: whiteness in CRT is not specifically an issue of anyone's race, ethnicity, or skin color, but instead is a constructed social position. Who is allowed to be white concerns who is allowed to occupy certain privileged places within a social hierarchy. Thus, criticisms of whiteness are not criticisms of white people, but instead are criticisms of who is allowed to be in the privileged club. For example, during the history of the United States, there were periods when people who were of Jewish, Italian, or Irish heritage were not allowed into the club of whiteness. This started to change not because anyone's race, ethnicity, or skin color changed, but because who was allowed in the privileged club changed. CRT emphasizes the importance of narratives and counter-narratives in challenging dominant ideas about race and racism. Counter-storytelling involves telling the stories and experiences of marginalized communities in order to challenge dominant ideologies and expose the hidden power structures that underlie them. CRT is fundamentally concerned with social justice and the elimination of racial inequality. CRT scholars argue that social justice requires not just legal and policy changes, but a fundamental transformation of the social structures and norms that underlie racism and other forms of oppression. CRT has faced significant criticism from conservative politicians, media outlets, and activists who argue that it promotes a divisive and discriminatory agenda. Critics often misrepresent CRT as a set of policies or beliefs that promote reverse discrimination, anti-white bias, or a rejection of American values. These misconceptions have fueled a backlash against CRT, with many states and organizations attempting to ban or restrict the teaching of CRT in schools and universities. CRT has also faced significant criticism not based on misconceptions, however. One of the main criticisms of CRT is that it is too focused on race and fails to take into account other forms of oppression, such as class, gender, and sexuality. Some scholars have argued that CRT's emphasis on race can lead to a neglect of other forms of social hierarchy and can even perpetuate them. Another criticism is that CRT is too focused on individual experiences and narratives and fails to offer concrete solutions or policy recommendations for addressing racial inequality. Some critics argue that CRT's emphasis on storytelling and counter-narratives can lead to a rejection of evidence-based approaches to social problems. Despite these criticisms, CRT has had a significant impact on legal scholarship, social activism, and public discourse on race and racism. Its core ideas and concepts have influenced a wide range of fields and have helped to shed light on the complex ways in which race intersects with other forms of oppression and social hierarchy. While there is ongoing debate and discussion about the scope and limitations of CRT, its importance as a critical lens for understanding the persistence of racial inequality remains undeniable. Thanks for watching this video, which I entitled A Much Too Quick Overview of Critical Race Theory Structured Around the History, Motivations, Criticisms, Misconceptions, and Key Ideas of CRT, including intersectionality, structural racism, the construction of whiteness, counter-storytelling, and social justice. This video was written, produced, and presented by me, Andrew Chapman.